Welcome to Discover Janesville. My name is Yuri Rashkin, and we are guests today at Fagan Automotive. And incidentally, Fagan Automotive is the newest sponsor of Discover Janesville. And my next guest is Dave Jennings. Dave, thank you so much for joining me.
You're welcome. How are you today?
I'm doing fantastic. I'm so glad that you were able to come down and speak with us. You are now Executive Director at the Rotary Gardens.
That's correct.
But prior to that, you were at General Motors plant in town. And what was your job title there?
I was chassis superintendent.
Chassis superintendent. So how did that hierarchy at the plant work, where you were part of that?
Well, and maybe I'll go back and maybe talk a little bit about how I got there and history and that kind of stuff.
Absolutely.
Initially, when I was right out of high school, getting ready to go to college, I was able to get into summer help. So I did that for a couple of summers, graduated, and took a job down in Beloit for a couple of years, and then got word that GM was hiring supervisors. So I came back, got hired as a supervisor, and kind of worked my way up to a production superintendent. And the responsibility of a production superintendent, the plant was divided up into about 4 different areas. I had the chassis area at the end, but we had tended to move around over the years. And I had, I think probably the last few years I was there, about 10 supervisors working for me. And then each supervisor had somewhere between 30 and 40 people in their department. So that's kind of how the structure works at GM.
Okay, and how many people were above you at the plant?
We would have had an area manager, they called it, that had probably 3 or 4 superintendents working for him, depending on that, and then assistant plant manager and plant manager above that.
Okay, cool. So how long did you work at the plant?
Almost 32 years.
Wow. And I was kind of curious. You said you were hired as a supervisor. Tom was saying that when he came on, the requirement was, can you do 5 push-ups? I would imagine for supervisors there was probably, or was it the same? I mean, what are kind of requirements that they had?
The requirements back then is that a lot of supervisors would be somebody that maybe had worked on the assembly line and had showed an interest in taking on more responsibility, or maybe had finished their college degree while they were working on the line and said, hey, I want more responsibility. In my case, because I had worked on the line down there, I had kind of that background, and they were also looking to hire some outside different talent, and so they went through an interview process. And then once we were hired in those days, we probably had, I'm going to say, pretty close to probably 2 months of intensive training from HR to health and safety and many different topics. And then you were kind of paired up to shadow some other supervisors probably for another, I'm going to say, 2 or 3 weeks before you were given an area to run.
So a pretty intense process.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
How big was the plant when you started, with mid-70s then?
Oh, employment-wise, I guess I would say probably we had, now I don't actually remember the numbers. At that time, we had the pickup truck on 2 shifts, and we were building, I believe it was the V Chevrolet, so on 2 shifts. So I don't know, I would guess maybe somewhere in the 5,000–6,000 people probably working there would be my guess at that time.
Okay. Were you originally from Janesville?
Yes. Mm-hmm.
So the GM plant was always kind of there, and
yeah, it was always kind of there. Actually, most people that had lived in Janesville knew of the GM plant, and when I went away from school and graduated, I thought I'm going to see what else is in the world, and went out there and worked for Colt Industries in Beloit for a while, like I stated earlier, and this opportunity opened up, and so I decided to give it a go, and it was a good choice.
How did it feel to, when you were a kid and the plant was always there, versus now that you're a part of the plant, and now you kind of had a different view of the things?
I guess as a kid, it was always there, but and maybe it was taken for granted. I mean, I don't remember it as being, it was, back in those days there were several employers that were fairly sizable, Parker Penn and GM and Gilman and, some of the others. So I guess as a kid, you probably I guess I never went on a tour down there, so I probably never really realized the magnitude of it. It was just that it was there, and then when I had the opportunity to go down there and work, I mean, for anybody that had been through there on a tour, I mean, it's pretty amazing, even back in those days, to see how from start to finish how an automobile was built. So it still is an amazing process, the way the assembly line works and all the parts come together and that sort of stuff.
The plant was always very much involved in the community, and there was a lot of community efforts and outreach. How did that affect you, and how did that help you kind of develop as a person? Well,
it gave you a sense of giving back to the community. And even back, United Way was always there. And I remember in some of the earlier days, you know, we'd run a United Way campaign, and it was probably at those times successful. And then, and I don't know whose leadership exactly, but Jim took a bigger role in the United Way process, actually to the point of taking, I'm going to say we probably set aside a week where we would have extra help that would go and get each operator off if they wanted to come in and sit down and talk about what it was United Way, how did it give back to the community, and that kind of stuff. And I think when we started doing that, the numbers really started to go up. You know, and as I look ahead, some of the other things, of course, the Christmas food drive, which was very successful for many years, where it didn't make any difference who you were, whether you were management union or the line worker or anybody. You just saw a good group of people coming together to help needy people in the community, and it was probably one of the most successful things that I've ever seen.
Okay. What do you think made Janesville plant different from other plants? Because I'm sure that you've had the opportunity to see other plants. What do you think made Janesville different or unique?
Well, and there may have been some other plants similar to that, but for it to be sitting in this location, most of the higher area probably was, I'm going to say, within, well, a lot from within Janesville, but a lot from the surrounding communities, probably, and I don't know, maybe I'm going to say a 30 to 40 mile radius. So it was kind of a family, you know, you knew each other. A lot of them were neighbors that had worked there. Where if you get into some of the bigger metropolitan areas like Detroit and that kind of stuff, I'm sure there was a portion of that concentration, but a lot of them would drive, you know, probably half or 45 minutes or more to those plants. So it wasn't quite the sense of community maybe that we had here. You kind of knew everybody, and they were proud of it, that they worked there, and they were proud, you know, of their neighborhoods and that kind of stuff. So from that sense, I think it was a little bit more of maybe a little bit easier at times to get everybody pulling in the same direction, because, you know, you knew a large majority of the people that were there. They were either your neighbor or somebody that you'd met in the community.